Good afternoon and welcome everyone. We'll wait a minute or so for those people to join today. We'll get started very soon. I'll get started and others can join in through the introduction. Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're coming in from. Welcome to today's webinar on what works in nature-based solutions and where to next. We're here today to discuss the lessons and recommendations from the independent evaluation of the Climate Resilient by Nature program Phase 1. My name is Fiona Lord, and I'm the MEL, or Monitoring Evaluation Learning Specialist at WWF Australia, working with our Sky team. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I'm situated, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to the custodians of this land and acknowledge their sovereignty was never ceded. I would like to extend my acknowledgement to the First Nations custodians of the lands that you're all based on from across Australia and the Indo-Pacific region. In today's webinar, we have our colleagues from the Institute for Sustainable Futures who were commissioned to do the evaluation of CRxN from UTS, University of Technology, Sydney, who will be presenting on the 6 key findings from the evaluation for the sector. They'll also be sharing the evaluation case studies of the CRxN projects in Vietnam and Solomon Islands. We have an opportunity then for Q&A, and then we'll also hear from colleagues in WWF Australia and WWF Mekong about how these lessons are being applied going forward. And we'll conclude with an overall discussion and provocation for everyone about what next with nature-based solutions. So to kick off, I'd like to invite our program manager, Tom Broadhurst, for CRxN Phase 1 at WWF to introduce us to the program in Phase 1. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Fiona. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I'm Tom Broadhurst, Program Manager for Climate Resilient by Nature at WWF Australia. I'm going to give a quick overview of the program before we dive into the detail of the evaluation. So Climate Resilient by Nature, which we call CRxN, but some others called CRxN, is an Australian government initiative managed by WWF Australia that was launched at COP26 in Glasgow in November 2021. It aims to enhance the climate resilience of Pacific and Southeast Asian communities through high integrity, equitable, nature-based solutions. Now, nature-based solutions intentionally protect and restore ecosystems in order to deliver benefits for people, for nature, and for climate. And CRxN trialed a diverse range of approaches that help communities to work with nature to build social, economic, and ecological resilience. Funding-wise, it was initially funded by 9.5 million Australian dollars from DFAT, Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade, for activities in Pacific and Timor-Leste. A little while later, in 2022, an additional $3.5 million was secured via the Mekong Australia Partnership for Water, Energy and Climate, MATWEC, which extended the reach and the timeline to 2024. And then there were subsequent extensions and additional resources secured in 2023 and 2024, which ultimately extended the program to June this year with a total funding of 21.2 million Aussie dollars. And we'll see later that this iterative expansion and extension, whilst very welcome, presented a few challenges for us and for partners. So the structure of the program, there's 3 components to it. As you can see on the slide. Component 1, MBS expansion, which built on existing nature-based solutions projects, MBS projects, of WWF in the Mekong and the Pacific, and also of Live and Learn in the Pacific. There was component 2, which was an MBS challenge, supporting more development-oriented organizations to pilot NBS initiatives in the Pacific. And component 3, which was a knowledge, or what is a knowledge hub for MBS learning resources, for tools, for stories that aim to inform, inspire, and influence. So go check that out on our website. Project-wise, the projects are implemented by several partner organizations, many of them listed there throughout Asia Pacific. If we go to the next slide, please. We'll have a quick look at them and a rapid run through of their approaches and locations. So we've got community-led forest carbon projects in Vanuatu, Fiji, and PNG with Live and Learn and Nakau. We've got coral reef restoration programs in Fiji, Samoa, Kiribati, and PNG with Kaima Foundation and Corals for Conservation. We've got agroforestry project in Timor-Leste with Caritas, CRxN, Aboriginal Carbon Foundation. Farmer-managed natural regeneration projects with World Vision in the Solomon Islands. Nature-positive business development initiatives with WWF in Fiji and the Sols, focused on sea grapes and sea cucumber. We've got women-led agroecology projects in Vanuatu with ActionAid, and nature-based livelihoods in the Mekong River Basin with WWF teams in Laos, Vietnam, and previously Cambodia. And there's also a project around community-led climate resilience in PNG and Solomon Islands with Save the Children, which ended at the beginning of 2024. Next slide, please, Fiona. So here's a quick snapshot of our overarching sort of MEL approach. So as I mentioned, the ultimate goal that you can see there is that Pacific and Southeast Asian communities are more resilient as a result of nature-based solutions. And these 5 outcomes listed there enable us to deliver that overarching goal, so that more communities are protecting and restoring ecosystems, that diversified finance is mobilized to scale and sustain nature-based solutions. That includes carbon market finance. That there's new and diverse livelihood opportunities created and realized. That there's increased stakeholder engagement in nature-based solutions with governments, with NGOs, private sector. And importantly, that women, people with disabilities, and climate vulnerable people are benefiting from and involved in nature-based solutions decision-making. Next slide, please. And then we'll see how we're sort of tracking with some of the indicators we've got to measure our progress there. So this data's in our annual report and reflects the period up to 31st December 2025. So I guess of note, you can see that more than 14,000 people from 164 communities have participated in CRxN projects, and that's across 10 countries overall. Combined, we've got like approximately 195,000 hectares of land or sea that have been restored or are under sustainable management. 25,000 people have reported reduced vulnerability to climate hazards. And nearly 7,000 people have engaged in nature-based solutions related livelihoods. So that ranges from aquaculture and agriculture to ecotourism and environmental management livelihoods. So as program manager, myself and the team, we're proud of these achievements. And today we'll unpack these results, how we got there, and perhaps what we could do differently in future. And with the evaluation team's help. So thank you, everyone, and back to you, Fiona.
Thanks so much, Tom. Before we dive into the presentations from the evaluation team, we'd like to hear from you. So my colleague Veronica has dropped into the chat a Mentimeter link, and there are 3 questions in this link. One about where you're from, one about what brings you here, and one about what is your experience with nature-based solutions. So, we're seeing some interesting responses. Quite a number of people from Canberra, also Brisbane, Melbourne, Laos, Bangkok. So a nice spread from around Australia, Asia, Cambodia, Orange, New South Wales, fantastic. New South Wales South Coast, New Zealand, welcome. Fiji, fantastic, good to have Pacific colleagues here. Excellent. Hobart as well, really diverse. Really nice mix of where we're all coming from today. So the next question, what best describes how you work with NBS? So there are 5 options there. Are you involved in implementing or managing NBS, funding or supporting NBS, research on NBS? Are you really just exploring and thinking or learning about NBS? Or is there another sort of role that you have with NBS? Yeah, it's really interesting to see the mix here. So we've got a number of people that are exploring and learning about NBS, and some others that are already implementing or managing NBS, others that are financing or supporting NBS, and some researchers. So it's really a great mix that we have. So is there an NBS challenge or question that brought you here today in particular? This will get you thinking. Are there some particular reasons that you came today? Some insights that you're hoping to hear about related to NBS implementation or NBS financing? Yeah, so one person says how we scale NBS is their focus. Also, understanding how to scale impact, quite similar, while retaining local leadership. Understanding lessons learned. Interest in what's happening outside of Australia. Yeah. Measuring complex benefits. Example, co-benefits. Seeking inspiration to apply and scale NBS in diverse settings. Hearing about achievements, lessons, and next steps. How can we scale NBS but keep it locally led with high integrity? Learning and hearing about NBS models and successes and strategies to work with Indigenous people and local communities. Measurement and evaluation, successes and learning. Fantastic. There's a whole range of questions that brought you here today, and I think these will be, many of these will be able to be answered today, and we have many opportunities to follow up. So how we're engaging with the private sector is another one there. Fantastic. So we'll now go into the first set of presentations from the evaluation team. So I'd like to invite Dr. Karen Winterford, Associate Professor of Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS, and she'll introduce the other members of the evaluation team today. Over to you, Karen.
Great. Thanks so much, Fiona, and really fantastic to be with you all today. We're really excited as an evaluation team to just share with you 6 key lessons of this end of program evaluation for CRxN. And we really encourage you to look at the full report. It's an extensive report with lots of information and lots of really rich insights and learning from you from all of those different country contexts and project contexts as well. And we really look forward to having some Q&A with you at the end to talk with you and to get your feedback and insights on these questions as well. And great that we're so many of us are learners here today as well. Really excited. So today you'll be hearing from our amazing evaluation team, and as you can see, we had a great team from across the country context where we carried out impact case studies, and so you'll be hearing from each of us today about the learnings from each of those country contexts, and we're really excited to have our evaluation team on the call today, and yeah, excited for you to interact with them and for to have any specific questions which might be country focused as well. Just in terms of our evaluation methodology, it was a really intensive process. We were just reflecting with WWF before we came on the call of this a very intensive evaluation for a very complex program, as Tom mentioned as well. So we had 9 evaluators across 5 country contexts, and we worked in a very collaborative way. We were involved in our proposal together. We were involved in our evaluation plan and our evaluation design, and we worked collaboratively through over nearly a 12-month period. Online, we sort of worked remote and online together, but it was a very collaborative and engaged process. We reviewed 70 different documents relevant to this program, and we also carried out an academic literature review using AI Perplexity as well. So there's a lot of rich data that came from the existing program documentation. We carried out 73 interviews with program and project staff, and also government representatives and also scientists. So we kind of really wanted to make sure that we looked at the broader ecosystem, the broader space in which this nature-based solution program operated, and to get insights about how this program is situating within the broader context of this initiative. We also carried out these case studies in those 5 country contexts, and interviewed, had focus group discussions, had sense-making workshops, very participatory sense-making workshops with 179 participants. Yeah, so ranging from men and women, from project staff, community-based staff, and those benefiting from these projects as well. And then going back to the collaborative approach, we worked collaboratively with WWF as well, with regular check-ins and regular meetings, and really sort of sense-making with them the evaluation findings, but also as a group as well across these multiple country contexts that we worked. We had that depth of understanding in each country context, but then we had that breadth of insight as well, sort of comparing and contrasting what was happening across each of those different contexts to get some real insights and to provide the sort of key lessons that we're sharing with you today, to provide that sort of a thematic perspective, which hopefully will guide nature-based solutions initiatives going forward. I'm now going to hand over to Jessie, who's going to start to introduce the first set of our key lessons. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. And yeah, these are just 6 distilled lessons. Please do read through the report and the 5 case studies that Veronica's put in the chat for a lot more of the detail. But we wanted to just present 6 lessons today. And the first one is that nature-based solutions require long-term investment to match the pace of socio-ecological change. Trees obviously take time to grow, soils take time to recover, and ecosystems take time to repair. And similarly, changing unsustainable practices, changing mindsets, and changing natural resource governance systems can take time. In our evaluation, we found that the very short initial timeframe for project implementation of 12 to 18 months and the 4 short extensions of 6 to 12 months each meant that it was difficult for project teams to plan for, monitor, and evaluate ambitious socio-ecological impacts. While we did find strong evidence of immediate short-term outcomes, program and project staff consistently highlighted that if the program had been designed as a 5-year program from the outset, their organisations would have developed more ambitious and more appropriate designs for achieving social and environmental change. And research and existing policies and frameworks show that restoration projects can take decades, and the European Union classifies nature-based solutions programs as either short-term of 5 years, medium term of 5 to 10 years, and long-term of more than 10 years. So given the high demand for nature-based solutions in Southeast Asia and the Pacific amongst both communities and policymakers, we recommended that international donors like DFAT and program managers like WWF Australia continue and increase their investment in nature-based solutions across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and that they provide longer-term, more predictable funding for nature-based solutions, ideally no less than 5 years for nature-based solutions aiming for climate resilience. Over to Lisa.
Lesson number 2, local indigenous and traditional knowledge is essential for nature-based solutions that truly work. The CRxN evaluation recommendations continue to prioritize traditional and indigenous ecological knowledge as a core design element in nature-based solution programs, and continue to build capacity and knowledge sharing on nature-based solutions. Our evaluation had found that one of the strongest aspects of the CRxN program has been its contribution to revitalize and use of traditional and indigenous knowledges and practices in the communities in which they work, which you will hear more about the case studies that we will present shortly. The CRxN project in Solomon Islands, Vietnam, and Vanuatu had harnessed existing strengths and traditional practices of the communities. For example, the traditional values of environmental stewardship in Solomon Islands and Vanuatu. In Solomon Islands, the natural assets of the sea grapes, and in Vanuatu, it's the traditional seed banks. And in Vietnam, it's revitalization of traditional agricultural practices, which had before and previously been abandoned in favor for chemical-intensive and unsustainable agricultural practices. As our evaluation team had found out, we recommend that WWF Australia and organizations that are implementing nature-based solutions programs continue to prioritize traditional and indigenous ecological knowledge as a core design element. Another component of the program that was highly valued by implementing partners on the ground was the Knowledge Hub, which shared research, resources, and learning activities with program partners on the ground. We recommend continuing this function in future-based sustainable programs, and ensuring that it is locally led by local people. There are several nature-based solution communities of practice based in Asia and also here in the Pacific that the partners could join or continue to build on. Thank you. I'll hand over to my next colleague.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. So lesson number 3 is on inclusive decision-making, on environmental stewardship and natural resources that governs and strengthens nature-based solution. So inclusivity in nature-based solution is very important because how we use resources differs from women, children, and youth. Men, such as men, use resources to get income, so as women as well. So in the interviews that we have had, some of the findings that you'll read in detail on our report, we found that everyone says that it's very important for them to be involved to ensure that they manage and look after their resources. So stewardship and inclusivity to manage resources is very important. In I'll say when I carried out the interview in western part of Solomon Island, which I'll be sharing more on later on, case study, almost to 100% of the people that we interviewed fully emphasized that everybody should be involved in the process of planning and implementing and managing on how their natural resources should be used. Yeah, and one thing that really stood out the most for me is the word that they keep on using is they are the custodian of the environment that they lived in, and that's very important. Because of that, it's nature-based solutions really aligned to what the people, the community wanted, because it is their livelihood. So integrating natural resources, nature-based solutions in the project is actually a key strength. So that's why it places such initiatives like this with WWF and all the other stakeholders that are interested in nature-based solution. It will be a great approach. I will be sharing a case study later on, highlighting the case study here in Solomon Island, and I'll share more on how women, men, and youth were and are included in the process of implementing this initiative. At the same time, we also identify opportunities where WWF can also work, or any other organization that you would that are here. We will share areas, and some of those like for example in Vanuatu, they decide to involve more young people, and they have limited a number of women that are included in decision making. So yeah, and there's a need for few strategies on how to engage people with disability in Vanuatu, but I'll be sharing the case study of Solomon Island to showcase how inclusivity of men, women, youth, people with disability are involved in the nature-based solutions later on today. Thank you. I'll pass on to the next.
Okay, so lesson number 4, some but not all NBS support market-based livelihood, which is depend on the effective system being in place. To say that many NBS in the CRxN program focus on establishing and build up on the market-based livelihood, but is it important to know that not all NBS facilitate or promote the market-based livelihood? When you read through the report, you will see quite a few codes. For example, country like Laos, where I conduct the interview, there's a many code that mention about that they try when they have the alternative livelihood, but there is the connection with the market for their product. So, for example, in Vietnam now, WWF and community build a connection. In our case study, they build connection with private company and to promote the flat-based environmental friendly agricultural production. And in Solomon Island, WWF also explore the producing the sea grape lotion and soap. So I wish I can buy that product when, I don't know if it's available come to Laos or not. Oh, I need to contact Hika. Then, when I go back to Australia, maybe the product sell in Australia. Okay, yeah. So, and in Laos, WWF and the communities develop a village development fund, or we call the microfinance, that support finance to local community to look for investment in the alternative livelihood. That, for example, in one village in the project also affected by the hydropower dam, that village development fund also support that community. So in our evaluation, we also found that not all the market-based livelihood introduced to the CRxN that will align with nature positive principle, for example, like restoration or regenerating the ecosystem. We have provided a menu of livelihood approaches to show their alignment with the nature-based solution for climate action, and also to support the implementing the organization. Sorry. This also what we provide is also help the organization and also local community to choose which approaches that align and fit well with their local context. This is very important, that also connect to what Hika mentioned, indigenous community, local context, indigenous knowledge. So this part we can take it as what we have found that in the livelihood approach. Sorry, my post. Last part, we found that in some context of the CRxN has been implemented for example, like in Solomon Island and Vanuatu, there's a need for greater investment in market condition. For example, the livelihood to be more economical viable, including developing policy and infrastructure, business skill, and the demand for the nature positive product. Like I mentioned, that this product will help local community, but also there's the need for link them to market, where to sell it, and also promote it. And lastly, we had our team had a fruitful discussion with WWF and partners about the extent to which WWF and traditionally conservation focused organization are well placed to facilitate and to be a broker for the market development in many communities. For example, start from this project study site. Yeah. So that's about livelihood, market-based for livelihood. Thank you. I move to the next speaker.
Thanks, Soy. So our evaluation found that while the Climate Resilient by Nature program was intended to strengthen people's and ecosystems' resilience to climate change, it was difficult to evaluate the extent to which these climate resilience impacts were achieved, because most of the projects had not sufficiently worked with communities during a design or inception phase to really understand what climate resilience means in their specific context and what success would look like from their diverse local perspectives. In line with good monitoring, evaluation and learning practice, the program did not impose one standard definition of climate resilience across projects, because climate resilience is obviously highly subjective and shaped by local contexts. But projects could have benefited from more time and an intentional approach to design nature-based solutions that were pertinent to each different community's contexts, their needs and aspirations specifically related to climate change. Similarly, future programs would benefit from locally led MEL systems that focus on local people learning about what works to address climate change in their context, for whom, including for more than human actors, and in which circumstances, and adapting their strategies accordingly over time, rather than solely focusing predominantly on monitoring the number of outputs delivered or complex standardized outcome indicators. The Climate Resilient by Nature program was only given a very short time frame to design the nature-based solutions, and we recommend future programs allocate more time for locally led and participatory social, environmental, economic, political and climate change analyses before implementing nature-based solutions. This would also support development of MEL systems that are meaningful to local people. Some projects found it challenging to develop meaningful locally led ecological monitoring systems in particular for their nature-based solutions within the short design and implementation periods. One really great example of locally led MEL in the Climate Resilient by Nature program was the development of a system for monitoring and evaluating sea grape management in Solomon Islands that Hika will tell you more about shortly. And local communities were really leading that monitoring of sea grape health and abundance. And we'll share that case study in a second. So our recommendations for future nature-based solutions initiatives are to strengthen the design and planning of nature-based solutions specifically for climate action, as I've just discussed, Make climate resilience explicit and locally defined in design and MEL systems for nature-based solutions that are specifically focused on climate change, and to support context-appropriate, locally led social and ecological monitoring in nature-based solutions initiatives. Over to Karen.
Great, thanks everyone, and yeah, amazing to hear from the team. And as you can see, we're a very collaborative team, and we all work together really well, which is great to hear from everyone and to get those nuances. And we're going to hear from Tam and Hika after me to share with you about the question of sustainability, which is the big one, and many of you had that as a key question at the start in the poll. So we wanted to share with you some lessons around sustainability, and our sort of big takeaway is that sustainability requires multiple pathways to scale, not just at replication. So many people across the sector asking how to take nature-based solutions to scale. And what we've identified in this evaluation, that there are multiple pathways and there's different ways to scale NBS. And it's not simply about replicating the same design in another location. Sort of working in international development for a long time, this question of scale and sustainability comes up over and over. And so we wanted to kind of dig a bit deep in terms of the concept of scaling. And we found a Finnish paper, which looked at nature-based solutions and scales as a helpful framework. And it has sort of 5 dimensions to that. It's one: scaling up, scaling out, scaling down, scaling in, and scaling deep. And we saw some of those examples within the projects that we evaluated as part of the CRxN program. So there's opportunities to scale up. In other words, deepen the impact in the existing NBS in those existing locations. So, for example, in Vanuatu, to develop the carbon credit scheme for managing invasive species had the potential to deepen the impact of existing conservation efforts and carbon credit schemes in that place. So it's really about sort of taking a deeper approach to the impact. To scale out, for example, in Vietnam, we saw that there was strong evidence that the NBS approach implemented by WWF there could be scaled out. So that means through large-scale investment in geographic replication of the flood-based livelihoods used in the project. So it's really about taking this program to new and different locations. And then in the concept of scale down, we saw, for example, in Laos, the Village Development Fund model for communities accessing finance for developing alternative nature-based livelihoods could be promoted as a form for scaling down. And that's where local governments start to kind of engage in this process as well and start to implement NBS through their policy instruments. So it's really about embedding it within those existing governance structures. To scale deep, we saw an example in Solomon Islands that Hika, we keep talking about your impact case study, Hika. Hika's going to share a little bit more about scaling deep, which in other words is strengthening the local community's environmental stewardship norms and encouraging change through culture, values and relationships. So really kind of deepening this value and this sort of commitment to NBS. We didn't see that many examples in terms of scaling in, and that's where NBS becomes mainstreamed within other sort of sector programs like water, agriculture, disaster management. So we think that there's potential for developing government engagement strategies in future NBS to support the uptake and integration of NBS across government policies and programs, and to kind of see it embedded within those multiple perspectives. I'm going to hand over now to Tam, who's going to share the impact case study in Vietnam. Thanks, Tam.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to share this case study from Vietnam under CRxN project. This case study showed how WWF Vietnam, together with communities and local governments in the Mekong Delta, had revitalized traditional flood-based livelihoods as a practical natural-based solution for climate resilience. Rather than treating floods only as a disaster, the project had helped communities once again use seasonal flooding as an economic and ecological asset. The first key outcome is to reduce vulnerability of crop loss during floods. Traditional models such as flood-in dry, lotted cultivation, seasonal aquaculture are naturally adapted to flood conditions. This means households are less dependent on intensive temporary systems, which are increasingly exposed to climate change shocks, salinity intrusion, and extreme floods. Second, the project has increased a set of the diversified income opportunities during the flood season. Community has generated income through the flooding dry, lotus product, dry feed, and small revolving funds that support household enterprise. This diversification is especially important because it supports rich and improves financial stability for low-income families. The third, we observe stronger social connection and solidarity through cooperative and producer group. Farmers now work collectively, share knowledge, asset market together, and support each other. Fourth, key finding that is ecological health in the Langshan wetland has improved. Monitoring found better soil fertility from natural sediment, improved water quality, and increased aquatic biodiversity and bird population. They are clear example of the livelihood and ecosystem restoration working together. In the fifth, women's economic participation had strength. Women gain improved access to finance through our revolving funds and cooperative activity that allow them to expand livelihood, build confidence, and improve household income security. Sixth, that is the project has attracted new private investment. A company, namely Amanas, is purchasing flooding dry from farmer and support value-added processing for export market. Finally, there is strong evidence that the model can be scaled up with the larger investment from international financial institutions. Research indicates major potential across Mekong region where reconnecting river, floodplains, and livelihood can deliver benefits for people, biodiversity, and climate adaptation at scale. In summary, this case study in Vietnam showed that when traditional knowledge, community leadership, science, and investment come together, floods can be shifted from being a risk to becoming a source of resilience and opportunity. So it's very clear. That is a case study in Vietnam. So I will hand over to Solomon. Hika.
Thank you. Me again. So my case study is on sea grapes in Western Province. So just to give a background on what sea grapes is, if you look at the picture, the green thing that the lady is holding, that's sea grapes. So thank you. So sea grapes sea grape is used for food. You can either throw, even when you harvest it, you can eat it straight away. And women, men at Saragi use sea grapes as a source of income. So and it's also one of the food that part of the nutrition food that Sairagi have, as well as other communities in Western Province and the Solomon Island. So sea grape has benefited the community in Sairagi a lot of ways, from the financial income that they have. Through sea grapes, they can be able to meet other financial obligations such as school fees for the children, and any other community development that they have. So that's the reason why the community is very keen on how to manage cigarettes. I'll give you a scenario. In the past, before this was from the interview that I had with them before the NBS was introduced to them. There was a time that they have to close the area of where the cigarette is growing, just for the purpose of it, just to recover. They close it for around 2 months, and that means the people won't be able to get income, won't be able to meet other needs, as well as people around Gizo won't be able to have a cigarette as one of their food that contains very nutritious nutrients. So, well, that was the case. So, having NBS project being implemented, this initiative being implemented at Sauragi, the community, and with all the trainings and with all the supports through this NBS, the community have now put in place the CRxN committee governance team. They also have not only just a governance team, but they also have subcommittees under that. They have rangers that monitor and keep tracks on the changes and the findings and with the help of WWF and the stakeholders such as the provincial fisheries division. They help them to come up with some of the ways on how to address the findings that the rangers have identified. And across all the governance system structure that they have put in place, women are all integrated in all the structures. One thing I find it interesting was in all the interviews that we had, all of them acknowledged that it is because of NBS that actually revised the whole leadership and governance structure of the community. And because of NBS, it encouraged them to integrate women across, women, youth, and in some cases children too, across all the governance structure where they see fit. So and that leads to a lot of positive impacts where women are now being empowered. In Sauragi, when we were there, almost all the women are the ones taking leadership role that lead in all the subcommittees. In one of the sites in Vela, a person with disability is actually the chairman for the committee governance of cigarettes. Yeah, so there's a lot of positive impacts. Even it also helped them build the confidence. For example, in Sauragi, where this picture is, they have a woman savings club where cigarettes supports it. And one of the long-term the community actually have that they aspire to have is add value to cigarettes where they could produce, which they have piloted doing, producing oil and body lotion, and it was once being a news in Solomon Island. So, however, it requires further supports where private sector and the government should intervene to help enhance and support in the future. So, so the stewardship and governing of cigarettes and to sustain it into the future is very important because this is what the people depends on as their livelihood. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the presenters. We'll move now into a Q&A. So we'll open up the opportunity for you to turn your microphone on or your camera and ask any questions for WWF or for the evaluation team. And oh, I've got one volunteer already. Feel free to also type a question into the Q&A function. So Anna, can I invite you first if you raised your hand? Oh, apologies, no worries. Was there anyone else that wanted to raise their hand and ask a question? Otherwise, there were a whole range of really interesting questions that came through from the Mentimeter. Oh, here we go, Karma. Please ask your question.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, thanks.
I'm currently in Australia pursuing my master's. So, but I was working once in WWF Bhutan, and while we were trying to develop some NBS related project, we had some challenges. So I just wanted to, this is question for WWF first. WWF, so like what are some of the key indicators that you consider while developing the NBS projects? Like, is there any certain kind of indicators that you consider while developing the projects?
Thanks so much, Karma. Would you like to start off, Charlotte, or should I kick?
Yeah, sure. I think we won't have time to go into all the indicators, but so please contact us after, Karma, so we can provide more specific information. But in general, yeah, we do have a bunch of different indicators related to nature-based solutions. There's some technical indicators around social, ecological, environmental, economic outcomes. But then there's some less technical ones around, you know, participation and decision-making, governance, things like that. We actually developed a Nature Suite set of tools during the extension. We had an extension design process about halfway through the program, and we developed a set of 10 criteria that we've then used to assess all the projects and identify gaps in those, so that the second half of the program had a better we had a better sense of what needed to be done. So yeah, Nature Suite, you can find them on our CRxN website. I'll put the link in the chat. But yeah, if you want more detailed information, probably best to take that offline, Karma. Thanks.
Thanks. I see Veronica's already put the link into the chat of the Nature Suite tools, which are a fantastic resource there for monitoring and evaluation of NBS. Did anybody else have any other questions, like to raise their hand before we go through to the next section? I see questions coming into the chat. Do you have any plans of expanding your research sites in Southeast Asia? So that's going to what's next. In terms of research, Karen, did you want to jump in there?
We would love to do more research on this nature-based solution. So yeah, if you have any specific projects of specific sites that you're interested in continuing some research, our team, we're all nodding vigorously there. Tam was nodding. Yeah, we'd love to work with you. So please reach out to us as well. Yep.
John, did you want to take your microphone off mute and ask any follow-up questions, or?
Yeah, sure. So kia ora, my name's John Clemo. I'm dialing in from Wellington, New Zealand, from Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Thank you so much. Some really great reflections and recommendations. Just on the inclusion aspect, I wondered if there was any consideration around how you can have a really inclusive approach and, you know, involve diverse people within communities, whilst also I guess managing the burden on certain people within communities in terms of you know, not putting too much pressure on them alongside all their other tasks that they do in communities. Was there any consideration around that? Thanks.
So Karen, did you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think lesson number 1 really speaks to that as well in terms of recognizing the importance of long-term programming and long-term agendas for NBS because of the initial short cycles and then extension cycles from a gender perspective, looking at gender transformative change to gender blind, gender aware, etc. Yeah, I don't think the program's kind of got to that sort of higher level in terms of understanding those broader dynamics of gender. So I think that's something that to think about, and it connects with the recommendation of the lesson learned about having a longer term perspective then means you can have more a deeper and a richer consideration of some of those inclusion principles to work for more gender transformative outcomes as well.
Thanks, Karen. Charlotte, do you have your hand up in relation to this also?
Yeah, I actually wanted to just follow on what Karen said for the previous question around research, just to say that, and we'll touch on this in a moment, but there is a knowledge hub that sits alongside this program, and there's been 5 learning programs, 3 of which have completed and 2 which are almost complete, and they've been very much kind of participatory research with our partners and some of the communities. So if you want to find out more, we have research on carbon programming and what locally led high integrity carbon programming looks like in the Pacific, which we did with Sustinio and some of our projects like Nakau and Live and Learn. We've done some work with UTS on blue foods in terms of as an MBS. And then we've got one on nature positive livelihoods, which we did with some consultants, and Tom, our program manager, led that. And we did have a webinar on that about a month or so ago, but you can access that research as well. And the last 2 are one on disability inclusion, which is really focused on how we improve our disability inclusion as part of our overall GEDC response, which I think we're really practical because it's going to have some guidance, and that's ongoing. And that's also building on some work that we did on GEDC in the Pacific and a program there and an evaluation. So it links together quite well. And the last one's on traditional ecological knowledge, which I'm going to speak about a bit in a moment. So I won't talk about that, but there'll be a webinar on that as well. So that really links with the inclusion and community-led and governance piece as well. But yeah, more research needed.
Fantastic. Ahika, before we come to you, there's 2 questions in the Q&A which we can try and touch on now before we go to the next section. So the first is from Katie. She said, for those projects that have reported positive impacts on livelihoods, were there any non-environmental activities included in those projects, such as financial literacy training? Did common activities emerge to complement NBS? Would anyone from the evaluation team like to respond to this?
I can share a bit on the finance. So the case in Laos, there's we call Village Development Fund, where the WWF also support local government in terms of training. I have very positive from the participant, like government who involved in the Village Development Fund, and also the community who representative that the capacity have improved and the support is very valuable for them. And one example from women participant, she mentioned that in the past I have no right or I have no voice or confident to speak up, but because of this involved in the VDF, and I'm more confident and communicate, I can share my perspective. So that part that I would say that is a positive one. Yeah. And my team, if they want to add more, feel free to add, Jessie or Karen. Yeah, thank you.
We'll go to the final question because we're running out of time. So Rom has asked a question on the question of scale. have you been able to gauge the demand from local communities to implement NBS? Was this part of the evaluation team's research? Would anybody like to pick up that question?
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, and then I think WWF can also speak to this because they're moving, you know, they've described this as phase one. They're moving to continuing NBS initiatives with many partners and many projects. But yeah, definitely there's a lot of appetite for NBS. And as Charlotte mentioned, because of the multiple dimensions in which it provides practical impact for communities, particularly in terms of conservation, in terms of livelihoods, in terms of climate change adaptation as well. So there is definitely a lot of appetite for communities for NBS. But over to Tom or Charlotte to add to that.
Yeah, I can add. I mean, as part of the program and CRxN more broadly, yes, obviously we worked with specific projects and communities, and there's huge appetite. I think about 6 out of the 11 projects will be continuing in one form or the other, and some others have got work in train. So there's definitely, you know, obviously they're highly relevant and very valuable to communities, but more broadly in terms of the international development sector, I think there's an acknowledgement similar to, you know, like 20 or 15, 20 years ago when we started talking about climate change and climate change adaptation or community-based adaptation. There is now an acknowledgement that nature-based solutions are a way in which we can achieve our development goals. Obviously, communities have many societal challenges or local challenges. They live in nature. We all live in nature, whether we recognize that or not. And there are natural assets that can help us address those challenges. So it really does help deliver for people and communities, but also have those environmental outcomes that we need in order to sustain the planet. So in a time of climate and biodiversity crisis, nature-based solutions are a way in which we can do that. So we're seeing a lot of interest. Of course, there is, you know, like in the early days of climate change adaptation, there is some confusion about what an NBS is and what it looks like. But I'd say like the overall driver is how do you help communities address the challenges that they face by working with nature? And that's the biggest, it's very exciting, and we're seeing a lot of interest. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think we have time for just one more question that's in the chat, and that is from Miko around focusing in on, while the evaluation is very site-specific, zooming into particular contexts, how did the team address some of the systemic structures or the system structures and incentives, zooming out into the larger contextual variables? Miko, did you want to come off mute at all and ask this question?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. The question actually stems from the fact that, you know, if you take a look at the Vietnam case study, for example, which is I'm very familiar with because I've been to the area. I mean, you can see, for example, that one of the biggest challenges we had was when, for example, one of the buyers that were supposed to be buying the floating rice actually backed out from the contract. And the team, for example, at Kanto University was actually trying all their best to find somebody else who would take in the slack. So for me, I mean, like, it's a good case study because the team got lucky. But markets are not actually operated based on luck, right? So if we evaluate things like this, how do you look into the larger context, the systemic variables that are actually impacting site-specific narratives by zooming out of, you know, the case studies that you're looking into? Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a complex program and it was a complex evaluation. And encourage you to have a read of the report, everyone. The link's been put in the chat multiple times, just in terms of how we structured the evaluation design to focus on, because it's an end of program evaluation, we were looking at the OEC DAC criteria and related questions. So we had questions around, you know, relevance, efficiency, coherence, effectiveness, sustainability, impact, etc. So we really did try to understand the whole program, and also too, because of the case studies that we had, these impact case studies weren't the full suite of projects within the program as well, and so we did complement our in-country work together with some of that review of the project documents. So I think we did address some of those more broader thematic sort of findings, as you described, Miko, in the evaluation report, but then gave the sort of the nuance and the depth to that through these impact case studies as well. And I think the section on scaling and where to from here will give you some insights as well into those different pathways for sustainability and for continuation and for stronger impact, and also recognising the multiple actors within the NBS programming approach as well, from, as you said, from upstream in terms of the government role, etc., down to the community role, and as Hika was describing, in terms of the sort of cultural norms and practices and commitments to NBS. So there's a whole range of different actors responsible and needing to work together to drive these initiatives forward. I can see that Charlotte's got a hand up, and Jessie as well. So I might go to Jessie first and then over to you, Charlotte.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think, yeah, we touch on some of these issues of systems level complexity and how things interrelate, and the need to really work at a systems level, particularly on market systems, but also socio-political systems. And I think we touch on some of the other research that WWF has commissioned on, for example, in Vietnam specifically on that market viability. And we had really, really rich discussions during our sense-making workshops together with WWF about some of these issues of how does WWF work in a space that's embedded in a market system and embedded in all these other systems, but trying to make change at a community scale as well. And I think it would be amazing to do more research in that space, given for ISF that's kind of our bread and butter, looking at systems change and how it all fits together. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, just to add to that, and maybe a little reality check, is when this program started, it was 18 months, and then we got a number of extensions. So it's sometimes hard to look at systemic issues when you're dealing with everyday problems, and that's, you know, the climate crisis is a really good example of that. The biodiversity crisis is. So having a second phase of the program, which Chen will talk about in a moment, is really important. Yes, it's only for the Mekong, but we do have other projects continuing in the Pacific as well. But you need much longer term programs to really identify and address some of the systemic issues, similar to, you know, like gender equity, a lot of the inclusion things. They take time to address, but we have done a good job of identifying those, and we're going to try and address some of them in the second phase. But also some of the learning programs really do. They dive into a specific issue, but then look at it from a systemic level, like the Blue Foods is a really good example of that. So is the Carbon Learning Program as well. They really look at those issues, but at a systemic level about what that looks like. But always a challenge.
Fantastic questions, everyone, and really great contributions from you all. So we'll move now into the next part of the webinar, which is what next? I'd like to invite my colleagues from WWF Australia and WWF Mekong to share with us in terms of what's next. Where does this lead us into phase 2 of Climate Resilient by Nature, and how are we implementing these lessons learned? So over to you, Chen, initially, and then Charlotte. So I'll welcome you, Chen.
Yes, thanks, Fiona. Good morning and good afternoon for everyone. I'm Chien. I work for WWF Regional as a coordinator to support Vietnam and Lao team on the ground to implement the project activities. So as our colleagues have been mentioned or presented a lot in the phase 1 for CRxN, we have achieved quite a lot of results for climate resilience. But again, we still have quite a lot of challenges in order to continue. That's the reason why we decide to continue with the phase 2. The phase 2 of the program will last for another 3 years with 5 million Australian dollars to support Vietnam in Đồng Tháp and Long An and Tây Ninh province, and also in Lao, Champasak province. The phase 2 will focus on 3 main outcomes. So the first one is restore habitats, connecting the river, floodplain, and protected areas in Laos and Vietnam. The second one is trying to improve knowledge, understanding, and capacity to implement at scale NBS, create conditions for further investment, strengthen civil society, and inclusive governance for NBS at landscape and institution. That is a third outcome. So you've heard a lot of lesson learned that our evaluation team has shared, and the phase 2 will take this lesson in order to bring it up to the phase 2 as well. So there are a number of things we continue with the activities, but for today, I just want to emphasize in one of the lessons that we will focus on the phase 2. So it's about the inclusive and participatory approach. Yeah, so the phase 2 will engage different groups in the communities, including farmers, women, men, and youth, and also the marginalized groups, such as the poor people, low-income households, and those who have limited production facilities and tools. The government authorities, including from central level, such as Ministry of Agriculture and Environment, people committee at provincial and commune levels. So these government stakeholders will be supporting for policies and investment for NBS practice in the future. The academic institutions, such as controlled universities and other research institutes, are invited to provide technical support for farmers and generate science evidence on NBS to advocate for policy change in the future too. So why the involvement of NGOs will have to reflect and contribute to the voice of farmers and share experience and expertise in different areas. Last but not least, the private sectors, the involvement of this body is really important to bring the NBS product, such as a floating rice, like rape or lotus, or any NBS products to the consumers, which then given the incentive for farmers to continue sustainable farming and select NBS practice in the future to support and protect the nature. So next slide, please. So how to make this inclusive and participatory approach to be implemented on the ground? So the phase 2 will follow 3 key steps. First is the co-design. This step provides opportunity for every relevant stakeholders to discuss on the project proposals and work plan of activities. So this also enable consensus among different stakeholders at the beginning of the project implementations. And the second is co-implementations and sharing responsibilities, which is supported by the establishment and operation of the project coordination teams. So this group gathers representatives from different stakeholders, including local communities and government leaders. The operation of this group is enabled by a mechanism that requires expectations of partners, transparency, accountability, and equalities and shared powers. The third one is a co-monitoring and evaluations, which is supported by the participatory monitoring and evaluation learning framework, or we can call it system, where It provides opportunity for all relevant stakeholders be involved in monitoring and evaluation of our work. So next slide, please. So all this inclusive and participatory approach in the phase 2 will be leveraged by a number of actions or activities. There are quite a lot. However, within this presentation, I just want to emphasize several key activities. So the first is the climate vulnerability study. So we work as we use as evidence-based activities, and this will be conducted at the beginning of the phase 2 to help us understand the potential impact of climate change on nature and the livelihood of local people in the project areas. So this study will provide information for the process of planning climate change adaptation and climate resilience. It can help also to raise the community awareness, local and stakeholder interest, and investment for the risk reduction and increased climate change adaptation capacity based on the nature-based solution. At the same time, this study will provide basic or baseline for tracking change, the impact related to reducing climate vulnerability during the project implementation and after the project completion. Secondly, the PML participatory monitoring and evaluation learning framework development. It is a tool for monitoring the progress and achievement of project through the regular checking the chain of the upset indicators. Especially through this PML system, we can encourage or fulfill the use and the development of traditional knowledge, which gradually disappearing in our modern life. So I would emphasize this. The third one is the JESSI plan development. It is a process of analyzing how climate change will impact on different groups in the communities, which then succeeding initiative to engage every group in the community to address climate change impact. Fourth, building capacity for communities. It's a non-stop process during project life. This will include knowledge on climate change, knowledge on JESSI, knowledge on sustainable agriculture and NBS, but also knowledge on the market and value chain and support for NBS in the futures. So all those kind of things will be the one supporting for the inclusive and participatory approach. So yeah, that also I want to present for today with you guys. Thanks for listening. Over to you, Fiona.
Thanks so much, Jen. I'll hand over to Charlotte now in terms of the implications for WWF Australia.
Great, thanks. Well, I'm going to rush this through a little bit because I want us to have enough time to have a bit of a discussion. But in terms of what it means for us and our work at WWF, I would like to say that, you know, we have accepted all 13 recommendations from the evaluation, and when you go online to look at the evaluation, you'll also see our management response in there. So you'll see that we have a plan to implement them. A lot of the recommendations sit outside of the CRxN program. They're kind of relevant for the whole organisation, and what you'll see is, you know, when you saw those 6 findings, you say, oh, that's not just relevant to MBS, that's relevant to any kind of development program. So we always come back to the same kind of overarching messages, which is, you know, around you know, community ownership and stewardship and participatory approaches and things like that. So I'm not going to talk about the traditional ecological knowledge. What I'm going to say, you can read what's on the page, but just to say that this is an issue that came out really strongly in the evaluation, but also something that we decided to concentrate on in one of our learning programs. And really just to say that you know, projects that build on existing traditional knowledge showed a stronger and earlier outcomes for people and ecosystems. It's pretty obvious, but we do keep having to mention it because when we have, you know, locally led approaches, that traditional ecological knowledge, it enhances not only the legitimacy, but also the uptake and sustainability of the programs, particularly where communities hold that decision-making authority. And, you know, we're all talking about locally led development, locally led approaches, and this fits in with that. It's really around that governance and who holds that authority. So the traditional ecological knowledge learning programs coming to a close. We're just in the process of finalising the research report and the learning brief, and we will have a webinar on that in May. So come to that and you'll learn a little bit more about how we're going to apply those lessons on TEK in our work going forward, along with all the other recommendations. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. I'm really excited about that next webinar and the integration of TEK in the programs moving forward. So to conclude, we'd like to open it up for discussion, focusing in on where to next for high integrity nature-based solution. And we have a key question to ask you. So if we know high integrity NBS depend on long-term change, Indigenous authority and community decision-making, what does that require us to change in terms of how we design, sequence, and deliver work on the ground? In particular, are we truly willing to fund at the pace of nature, of ecological and social change, and not political cycles? Are we prepared to treat TEK or traditional and Indigenous ecological knowledge as authority and governance and not just inputs? Are we designing NBS to empower communities to decide, adapt and lead, or just to deliver predetermined NBS models? And when we talk about scaling NBS, do we mean just replication? Or are we actually serious about scaling finance, policy, and institutions and accountability? So I'd invite you to answer this provocation in the chat, or also if you'd like to raise your hand and share any reflections on this key question.
And it's called the provocation on purpose because it really does challenge us to think about some of the systemic issues, Miko, that we have to address in order to do this work well, and the systems that prevent us from doing that. So yeah, would love to hear a brave soul come and off mute and give us their take. I don't know if Miko's still here, but I'm sure you had something to say on this.
It's a really challenging question. There's so many systemic aspects of this. Rom, I see your hand. Would you like to start us off?
Yeah, happy to contribute. I was attending the locally led community of practice meetings earlier this week, and the challenge of funding cycles is also something they're pondering at depth as well, and it continues to surface as a challenge for international development generally, I think, not just specific to nature-based solutions. So I don't have a solution to offer other than that it's a shared problem, and, you know, within the system that we're all working in, really invite some of the decision-making and institutions to think about how they can enable these outcomes by addressing those barriers.
Yeah, absolutely. And does that mean we need new partnerships or emerging collaborations to really systemically address some of these challenges? Does anybody have any reflections on the sorts of governance or the sorts of arrangements that might be beneficial for having these longer term arrangements for NBS? Miko, would you like to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking that this is actually not just a question for NBS, right? But for every long-term social political project that every society is facing. because you would have wished that, budget cycles are not actually 3 to 5 terms for governments, so that, for example, there's continuous prioritization on the part of donors, for example. But the fact is that such is the case, right? So I think it was hinted to by Karen and Charlotte a while ago that if you'd probably like to do a longer term planning for these types of initiatives, then you would have to look at a funding portfolio that doesn't only just involve one particular funder, and make sure that you are putting all the chess players in the row within that particular context. Because the reality is, funders have funding cycles, and each one of them. And so therefore, how do you actually address long-term support? So yeah, thanks.
I like that, bringing all the chess players into the room, and making those connections between different funding partners, different policy actors. Michael, would you like to add to this discussion?
Yeah, I think maybe just following on from that makes me think about when you talk about long-term funding, and maybe there's the opportunity to think about where there's analogous things that we already fund, which have long-term funding cycles. So I think particularly around kind of public goods and infrastructure, and whether there's the ability to start thinking more about nature-based solutions as that kind of analogous to infrastructure, and the way that you design long-term funding for that type of thing, and try to replicate, models that say the financial sector or other parts of government actually understand and apply it here.
I see a research agenda emerging in terms of systems change and long-term analogous ways of integrating different approaches. Would anybody else, perhaps from UTS, the research team, like to add in around this?
I can jump in, and then others can jump in as well. I think another sort of consideration, it's not necessarily the answer, but it's another thing to think about. And we've been discussing this as well within our institute in international development. The willingness to fail, and I think this was something that sort of came up with CRxN as well. Like when we're doing innovative programming, not everything is going to go to plan. And I think with international development, we have this control and predict setup where we think we're going to get these desired outcomes. And I think we need to be more adaptive management, recognition of experimentation, ways of innovating, and having cycles of learning, and sort of recognizing the sort of fail fast, move on to the next option as well. So I think there's a different way of thinking about social political changes, as Miko mentioned, and as Jessie said right at the start, and you've also said as well, Fiona, what is the pace of nature? How do we actually work with the nature-based solutions, which is respectful of nature and working with nature, and recognizing that we have to change our our narratives and our worldviews about how we engage with nature as well. And that's part of the nature-based solutions aspect as well, changing our love of nature in a different way. I'll hand over to Jessie.
Yeah, I definitely don't have a quick solution. But yeah, one thing I think about outside of this kind of work is the promise of paying more attention to Indigenous worldviews and Indigenous governance in Australian diplomacy, but also in international development, and thinking about ways of governing and ways of being that are more focused on future generations and past generations. And, that's a very long-term change agenda, but I think that's a promising sign to see some of those shifts in thinking.
Thanks so much, Jessie. There's one other person with their hand up, David, and then we'll need to wrap up. David, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona and everyone. Just given, the need for Indigenous authority and the integration of TLK for sustainable MBS, and considering that First Nations engagement is now a priority area for DFAT. I'm just curious whether there's any plans to integrate learnings from First Nations communities and perspectives here in Australia during CRxN's second phase. Or it's probably more of a question than answering the one on the screen. But curious.
Well, good
question.
question.
Yeah.
We have actually applied for some funding to do that, so we'll see. But yeah, the TEK learning program, some of that's already being integrated into phase 2, but also our broader MBS programming. So watch the space. But yeah, I mean, it really brings into sharp focus the need for Indigenous and local governance. Originally we thought, it's about ecological knowledge, but knowledge is not an input. It's a whole way of doing things and making decisions. So yeah, watch the space. But we'd love others to come on the journey and learn from others who are already well on that journey. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So we've come to the end of the webinar. So thanks so much for everyone for joining today and for the fantastic presentations from the evaluation team and from WWF Australia colleagues. Particularly thanks also to Veronica Joseph for pulling us all together today and running this webinar. Highlighting now we've got the TEK webinar coming up in May, so look out for that. And please also stay tuned. The evaluation report has been shared in this chat, but will also be distributed via email with the webinar recording and also the management response to the evaluation. Thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you at the next webinar on TEK. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Everyone, goodbye.